welcome to the Hoboken.
And we're live.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hoboken Historical Museum. We are gathered here today to do some honoring. First, I'd like to thank the Historical Museum for allowing us to have this wonderful event by which we can recall our learning institution and the two individuals who made it happen. I may be the designated voice today for relating the history of how a once prominent circus school happened to land in Hoboken, but I'm not the only voice. Fortunately, I've been, and really I'm in awe with this quite nasty weather, how many have turned out. I am joined here by a good many of my peers and friends. And although you can't see them, I'm going to shout out their names now because you're going to see them on the big screen. We have Chris Glover-Versin. Her husband Philippe. We have Donna Oroz. We have in the back Noel Selegzi. We have where am I? Okay, and where I have also to welcome across the country and abroad, we have Mia Wolf, Marette Reiner from Louisiana, hopefully listening in. We have Jessica Hentoff out in St. Louis. We have Joan and Jakob Benson out in Denmark. So it's and Anna Katerina. So you're going to get to see a little of these individuals as we go. Many of them who could not be here have sent me stories or comments that I'm going to read aloud from during this lecture. And I'm going to start with a little bit of my own background history. I've been passionate about circus arts since childhood, both as a visual artist and a physical artist. I earned a scholarship to Pratt Institute when I was 16. And when I was there, I developed their first independent study program so that I could also learn mime and juggling. But it wasn't until I met Nina and Gregory that I understood the skill and artistry that I had never encountered before. Good teachers are telescopes. They look through you. They assess your weaknesses and strengths and guide with a sensitivity to both. They magnify and clarify what is essential. They not only point out faraway goals and universes, but instruct and encourage step-by-step paths to reach them. Nina and Gregory were the essence of this. Nina studied circus ever since she was a child. She performed with the Kirov Ballet, and for 20 years, she was an exalted circus acrobat and aerialist. It wasn't until her first husband, Marie, put her into a pair of clown shoes that she realized her true calling. And Nina was the first woman clown to ever grace the ring of the Moscow Circus. Gregory, his career was launched in the late 50s when he joined the legendary acrobatic troupe, Yevgeny Mileyev. Ooh, I get to use my little beamer here. This is Yevgeny's son, and behind him is young Gregory. And at the end is Yevgeny. You should make note of what an important role ladder plays in this opening act that Gregory was involved in, because you're going to see later on some of the acts he created for his students that were inspired by this. At the time they chose to defect from Russia, Leonid Brezhnev was in power and the KGB still ruled. Although they'd long been stars of the Moscow Circus, the moment they applied to leave, they were banned from performing, from practicing, from communicating or seeing any of their friends or colleagues. And worse, all records of their achievements were purged, as if they didn't exist. I can remember Nina describing to me how she and Gregory, they were virtually prisoners in their own apartment, small apartment, and they had a bar hanging in the kitchen doorway upon which they would do relentless push-ups and pull-ups, and then spot each other for handstands, because that was really all the practicing they could do. And they were accustomed to doing a very physical work. So that was kind of tragic. And I think that went on for 6 months. They were confined to their apartment before they were able to leave. I met them on only their second day in New York City. Nina spoke no English, so Gregory had to translate and speak for both of them. I think he was very unhappy once Nina mastered the language and began to speak for herself. I know that. And I have a story about that in my exhibit upstairs. Joan Benson, who was a student at the Circus Arts Center, went on to have a lucrative career as a duck in Denmark. Yes, a duck. She was the lead costume character in a very long-running television show for children. But at the Circus Arts Center, she was trained as an acrobat and top mounter with her partner, Jakob Benson. Joan is now a puppeteer and sign language translator in Denmark, and she sent this about her experiences. The Circus Arts Center taught me that discipline is a choice, that you can do more than you ever thought possible, that you have to trust what your body instinctively can do once, and then train hard to make sure you can do it every time. And they taught us how much hard work goes into making magic. I finally heard back from Jakob late last night. But I'm thrilled he wrote, and I'd like to include a few of his notes. He wrote, "I remember the day Joan and I did a trick we were working on, but badly, making her dive head first and full force into my groin. I collapsed, gasping. Nina leaned forward and soberly asked, 'Will you survive?' What strikes me, thinking back, is how Gregory built all the rigging, apparatus, equipment, everything we needed himself. He had a small workshop in the back. of the workout space and his tools and the welding equipment where he would often work during the day. And I recall the Circus Arts Center as being a very emotional place. Even though the work was always extremely focused and the tone around it uncharacteristically uncompromising. From Missouri, Sonia Faraya, who I forgot to mention earlier. Sonia Faraya wrote that Nina and Gregory had a profound effect on her life. The lessons she learned at the Circus Arts Center had gotten her through some pretty rough times. Here are some of the ones she cited. Whether standing on Karen's head, whilst she climbed up and down a ladder, or whilst performing a trick with Jessica on a ladder balanced on Moret's feet, or while balancing on the handlebars of a moving bike. Gregory taught me to be still by grounding down through my own feet or hands into the earth, and not to find balance through the walls or room around me. In doing this, I learned that I must only rely on the stillness of my own self. Mia Wolf's take on learning was very zen. She likened it to the corralling of self into one intense stream of doing. Sonia said it another way. I learned that trying takes place in the future and is never successful, but doing takes place in the now and makes everything and anything possible. A triple heel hang, for those who don't know. That's Sonia on the bottom, Moret and Jessie holding her. John Towson ran the theater department at Montclair University for many years. Before that, he and Fred Yockers were my clown partners in three-ring circus tours across the country in Canada and Alaska. John contributed this. Like many master teachers, Nina and Gregory could say a lot with very few words. Gregory was teaching me slack wire on an 1/8-inch wire, which in the beginning was very frustrating. One day, I had a bit of a breakthrough and managed to hang in there. I excitedly informed Gregory that I had only fallen off 7 or 8 times. Now you know, he said. You have only to fall off 1,000 more, minus 7 or 8. John said, it's a perspective I've kept with me for 40-odd years. The Big Apple Circus actually began in a loft I had on 17th Street and 5th Avenue in New York. By then, Nina and Gregory had already been teaching classes in my studio and going on short tours with three-ring shows across America. They were very disillusioned by American circus. They found it amateur and frivolous by their standards, and too focused on what they called fireworks. They lamented that the American public craved special effects and high drama. It felt to them that the subtle and beautiful art form of intimate expression was non-existent in American three-ring circus. Knowing they were hungry for other opportunities, I introduced Nina and Gregory to Paul Binder. Paul and his juggling partner, Michael Christensen, had been street performing in Europe for several years, then worked in Annie Fratellini's famous circus. Her shows were unique in that they mixed both faculty and students together in the ring. And I saw the show early on in Paris, way before Big Apple Circus, and frankly, it made me weep. It was not only impressive for the skills, but for the relationship and rapport between teacher and student. That was so touching. And it was a very moving show. Paul returned to New York with a rather watered down concept of this format Annie had perfected. And I discovered quickly that introducing both parties was not a good thing. Paul and Gregory hated each other at first. Yes, Nina, ever the diplomat and gentle soul, had to mediate every moment and encounter. The two sides simply nurtured different goals and dreams. For the Russians, training young people was the focus. Paul could only see those fireworks and instant fame. But without Nina and Gregory's intense involvement, without their expertise and experience, it is doubtful the Big Apple Circus ever would have been created. One day in the second year, in between shows, we students were summoned to the ring and given an ultimatum. We had a choice of staying with Paul in the show or going with Nina and Gregory to continue studying. I remember all of us sitting on the ring curve, Paul on one side, Nina and Gregory on the other. And after this pronouncement, the entire troupe, save one person, stood up and moved to Nina and Gregory's side. This was in 1979. At this point, I'm going to ask Chris Glover to come up and give the next section of the narrative, as she will do.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Karen, for inviting us. So I'm going to sort of take over and bring this to Hoboken. At the time when all of us left the Big Apple and we wanted to follow Nina and Gregory. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We were trying to practice in different places. So Nina and Gregory lived in the Manhattan Plaza. Maybe some of you know that in New York City, their apartment. And I used to go there and practice. Gregory would give me plastic cups and saucers, and I used to have to throw them and catch them on the top of my head. So that's how I practiced. And meanwhile, Michael would be doing contortion on the floor next to it. And they kept saying, we need a place, we need a home. And Gregory said to me in his way, Chrissy, you will find a place. You will do this. So I didn't have a choice. I was teaching a class here in Hoboken at the Everett School of Dance. Who knows it? Yay! And just a few doors, which was just a few doors down before this building, 412 Washington Street. And I saw the furniture store on the bottom level. And I looked up and I saw these windows that must have been about 2 stories high. So I went into the furniture store and I spoke to the manager and I said, well, what's going on upstairs? And he said, we just keep some furniture up there. And I said, can I see it? So I went up there and it just looked perfect. I mean, there were 22-foot ceilings, which really isn't that high for circus, but it will do. There was an office space. It just looked like the ideal place. So I asked him, would you be willing to rent it? And he said, yes, we could negotiate that. So I came back, went to see Nina and Gregory, and I said, I think I found a place. So the rest is sort of history. They did get the place. I think they were paying, how big was it? I don't remember how the actual size of it, but they were paying $600 a month for the space. And we got to work with my husband, Philippe, helping to clean the space. Gregory and Philippe did all the installations of all the connections for the aerial acts, brought in the props, brought in all of the mats, etc. And Nina and Gregory turned it into a vocational school that was certified here in New Jersey. And they also made it a non-for-profit. So then it was a matter of opening up the doors. And actually, before Karen had sent me her post to do this, she was doing this event, I had received from Vincent Aurora, who lives now at 412 Washington Street, an email. He was doing the history of his building, and he saw in the New York Times an article about Philippe and I when we graduated from the school. So he got to me through my yoga website. Oh, there I am. And I started telling him about the school because he really wanted to know what did the building look like, what were those windows, how was it heated, was there other things in the building. So it was so interesting that these two things were happening simultaneously. So let me think what else I wanted to let you know. So there was a wonderful gentleman who used to do the Big Apple Circus. His name was Louis McCagg, and he was the one who actually helped Nina and Gregory to create this school. And he was at our graduation, and there's pictures of us, I don't know if you saw it, of Louis giving us our diplomas, and how eventually Nina and Gregory put us out in the world. And it was really frightening because we had no idea about the American circus. They only knew the Russian circus, and I know, Donna, you've experienced that as well. It was very hard to find a way, especially because American circuses, for the most part, were people who had either grown up in the circus. Very few circus schools really existed in the United States, and on the northeast coast, I think there was just Big Apple and Circus Arts Center, really. So just going back to think about the school, I was teaching a special placement class to help pay for my classes. Philippe helped me with the rigging, etc. And when we left the school, we had 3 acts. So we did 2 aerial acts. Philippe did single track.
You can see
we did a trail act.
Yeah.
It will show up?
Yeah.
Okay. And I did a balancing act. And that's really what Nina and Gregory were all about. They had the ability to find your strengths, your weaknesses, your abilities. And I have memories of commuting from New York to Hoboken, to the circus school. And the work itself was so challenging that I would cry on my way in. And when I left the school, I would cry on my way back to New York. It was just really, really hard. And Gregory was difficult, you know, he was very tortured in many ways. He was wounded, I would say, from his experiences in Russia. And so that translated often into this world and what was going on and working with us. And here we were, a bunch of suburban or urban kids who knew nothing about circus. And he was turning us into circus performers and making us do incredible things that we never imagined. So he was always taking us to the edge. And he was always, you can do, you will do this, you can do it. And I think in the end, we really did.
Yeah.
It was remarkable, it really was. And we really bonded because we all knew that we were all feeling a little tortured. I mean, we were all having the same emotions and feelings about trying to become, maybe it was not Gregory's reality of what we should be, but he did form us into performers, entertainers. So Philippe and I, we eventually went out on the road, and we performed across the United States and Canada with different shows and circuses for about 6 years. And after that, to continue their legacy, when we semi-retired and had children, Philippe continued to do single trapeze, and I was doing gymnastics, and then we opened up our own circus school. And that was at SUNY Purchase with Donna's husband, George. He was our partner, and we ran a circus summer program for 25 years.
Wow.
And we decided what we learned, we're going to put it out there in the world and let other children have the experience of learning how to really trust yourself, know that you can go beyond what you think your limits are, but at the same time, we wanted it to be very joyful and happy, and it was so rewarding on so many levels. So I'm really thankful to Nina and Gregory for that, because they gave us a whole life, and that life is continuing actually with my daughter, who now runs her own circus program. And she's here today as well, Claire. And I know a lot of the people who came out of the school, their children now are in circuses, professional performers, or teaching. So it's just, it's been a remarkable journey, and I'm so, so thankful. And thank you, Karen, for inviting me.
I just wanted Jessie to see that I'm wearing her circus. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Chrissy.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chrissy. And there will be photos to substantiate what you were speaking. I promise. So, you know, although Nina and Gregory opened their classes to the neighborhood and the public, our core and the professional students were really their focus. Let's take a look. That's myself and Kathy, who was an early partner. This is Marette Reiner, the start of working on her, what was a beautiful wire act that she created. Here we have Chrissy and Philippe.
He said I was a pain in his neck.
And there's a wonderful shot. This is a ladder act that, again, when I was working with Kathy, I was developing at the school. Ladder. Here is Anna basing Marette and Kathy. There is Chrissy on one of the other acts she had. Look at this act. She walked on the ball. She's balancing. Well, here, this is in practice, right?
Yeah.
This is the creation. This was practicing, which was a pole with a glass, with a tray with glasses on it. Okay? You're going to see very soon where that act went to. This was practice. This is Anna holding Marette, Kathy, and is that Sonia?
Joan, I think.
Joan, you're right. Okay, so we all, as Chrissy mentioned, we all flourished under their often ruthless discipline and very strict methodology. Wasn't easy because, as Jessica Hentoff recalled, they took ordinary young people and created world-class circus acts. Philippe, Mia and Donna, their specialty act was an aerial act, but this is a Roland Loeb act they had with acrobatics. Okay, so I threw that in because that's me in Germany at the International Circus Theater Festival. I brought 2 productions over. It was by invitation, and that was a lot of fun. Okay. Chrissy, this is her act. If you can't tell, she's got a knife in her mouth. Balanced on the edge of the knife is a sword, and on top of the sword is that glass tray with the glasses piled up.
Tray?
Yeah.
That's why I cried a lot.
Chrissy said that's why she cried on that. Before I show the next slide, I want to read this passage from Jessica Hentoff. Our training was physically difficult. At one point, Gregory mandated that I do 50 heel-ups. That's hanging from a trapeze by my heels and doing pull-ups with my legs. Before I came into school. And then 50 more up high when I got to school. This was followed by running my demanding 2-person aerial act 5 times in a row without a break. Then we could start training for the day. But hard as it was, once we finally took the act on the road, we were always able to perform strongly and safely, no matter how rough the tour was. And to my knowledge, this trick, which is a heel to heel, one heel, has never been duplicated in this country. Mm. Nina and Gregory gave me this trick. It was really a remarkable trick. Nina was always positive and encouraging. But training with Gregory was just simply grueling. I will squeeze you like a lemon until there is nothing left. And we all know his mantra. To do circus, you must steal hours from your grave. So we practiced 7 days a week, often 8 hours a day. If you got teary, Gregory would say, go home and cry in the shower. Marette Reiner was a native of Switzerland. She now runs an established circus youth and children's program in Louisiana. Marette is the most knowledgeable person on Gregory there is. His history and behavior, his character and moods. At the school, Gregory made use of her ballet skills to have her walk on point across a tight wire. Sadly, Marette has very few performing photos left because she was a victim of Katrina and lost them in the flooding. She was a very beautiful tightrope walker, and she was on the road for years with circus before ending up in down south. Donna Farina arose, gave an example of Nina and Gregory's creative thinking. I showed up to practice one day on crutches with my knee in a cast, an old injury that reoccurred from my dance days. I was sad and depressed that this would be the end of the dream of circus for me. Instead, Nina looked at me and asked, "Are you afraid of heights?" And I said, "I don't know." Her answer was, "Then you're not." And she immediately lifted me up to grab onto a trapeze bar. And that is the history of our double trapeze act, created and choreographed by Nina and Gregory with Mia Wolf as my trusted partner. I should add that through her travels with circus, Donna met and fell in love with her husband, George. George is a very high-level and wonderful Hungarian circus acrobat and juggler. And in fact, I used to pass with him a long time ago. We used to pass clubs, and my palms are still stinging.
And you supported him.
And I supported him. I hope you didn't mind. I supported your husband. You probably wish I still supported him. Mind you, back then, all of us were already deemed too old to be learning physical arts. The Russians and Chinese start their students as young as 6 and 7 years old. It's a way of life there. Taken from their parents, they live, they train, they are schooled in the circus institution until their late teens. When we began, we were all already in our 20s, except for Noel Selegzi, who was only 10. That's Noel holding a hoop for my dog, Littleface. Who remembers Littleface? Littleface was just the most wonderful. What was that?
He said he's not the dog.
Yes, he's not the dog. Littleface, Nina and Gregory had a nickname for Littleface. They called him the Professor. Noel, I'd like to ask you to come up now and speak if you might. I know you have something you'd like to relate. Noel Selegzi.
Well, unlike the circus performers and students who were really dedicating their lives to I was just a kid, commuting from the Bronx a few days a week, got to tour a bit, but I didn't know Nina or Gregory as adults. I think when I went off to college, I never saw them again. And that wasn't by design. And I remember when Gregory passed away a few years back now, that I realized that I'd only known them as a child. And that they were sort of frozen in time for me. And in an odd way, I think they probably would have liked that. Like I never got to know the Gregory that everyone fears. They were both nurturing, nice people. But when Karen asked me, is there anything you remember that you wanted people to remember? And I did. Because besides working with professionals hours and hours a day, they did work in the community. And there was a young girl whose name I didn't remember, and last night, I think you sent me an email that her name was Nancy. She was younger than I was, so if I was 10, she would have been 7 or 8. About
She was
8.
8.
My daughter, back there, 8. Very talented young woman. And Nina and Gregory treated her like a daughter. And I remember one day I came and everyone was crying. I didn't know what had happened, but Nancy had been hit by a car and killed. And for all the gruff and all the, oh, it's all about the profession, it wasn't for them. I think a part of them died with Nancy because they had really taken to her. And I think that was part of the school as well. I mean, for as much as they were teaching an art form, there was a part of them that was apparent for everybody. And in an odd way, though I missed the opportunity to get to know them as adults, I was kind of shocked when they mentioned that Gregory had died, that he had still been living in Manhattan all those years. And any time I could have probably gone and played a game of chess with him or done something. Circus was not in my blood. I lacked talent and ambition. But as I said, I think in an odd way, I really appreciate that I'll only know them from the eyes of a child. So they did leave a lot, and not just for circus.
Thank you, Noel. And I'll just add what Jakob wrote to that. I must have been among the oldest, being in my late 20s when I started there. But the young ones, the children, always had a special focus. I remember Nancy, an amazingly talented 8-year-old. She had great energy and a smoothness for everything she did. The hopes for her were sky high. Nina and Gregory considered her the child they never had. So the loss was devastating when she was suddenly run down by a truck right on Washington Street. The grief was enormous. Gregory had all the students donate whatever they could, no matter how small the amount, to give to the family for the funeral. Unfortunately, the Circus Arts Center did not have the longevity its creators had hoped for. Within 5 years, the building was sold and the new owner had other plans for the space. By then, many of their acts and students had graduated and were on tours with circuses, stage productions, in movies, on television, other types of shows. They presented Chrissy and Philippe. That was their promotional picture, a wonderful one. Okay, this is interesting in that this is not only the last performance I did for the Big Apple Circus, but if you can see where I am standing, this was September, mid-September of 2000. And interestingly enough, Littleface and I were at the opening ceremonies at the World Trade Center. We were hired to perform for the opening ceremonies, and I can say this was our closing ceremony. This is Anna Katerina. Unfortunately, I was hoping she'd be here today. She left the Circus Arts Center because what she wanted to do was theater, but she was so gifted for circus. And Gregory loved her, and she was a fantastic understander and bass. And when she announced that she wanted to go back to theater, he was furious. But she had a very long and successful life in theater. Who saw Batman Returns? There's the poodle lady, Anna Katerina. And who saw Boardwalk Empire? It was a TV show, yes? It's Madame Junet, who ran the store, I believe. And here she is in a film which she played with Michael Douglas. So just to say that the training led to other lives, but that everything we learned was really useful and translated to another field very well. We had substantial careers, all of us, but we took Nina's words of wisdom to heart. As Chrissy spoke, she always said, pass it on. When performing was no longer viable, most of us took to teaching. I'm still director of a circus program in Newburgh, New York. Barrett Reiner established a program and teaches kids full-time in Mississippi. Chrissy and Philippe ran their programs in Westchester, including SUNY Purchase. Mia has taught in camps and private aerial classes. John Towson's been running a unique and great physical comedy lab in Brooklyn, soon to be reopening in Greenwood Lake. Anna Katerina, following a successful career in theater and film, now works with elderly actors and actresses to create autobiographical productions that they write scripts for and she directs. But perhaps the most dedicated and successful of all of us is Jessica Hentoff, who has her own training center in St. Louis, Missouri. She is the founder, executive, and artistic director of Circus Harmony, the most respected social circus school in the country. Her top students are known as the celebrated St. Louis Arches, and they perform every year with the one-ring circus, Circus Florida. Here are the St. Louis Arches. after Gregory died, Jessie wrote in a beautiful tribute. I have worked with thousands of children. Nina and Gregory never saw my school. They never met any of my students, save my biological children. Yet their influence touched all of them. Jessie's students now tour the world with the most prestigious of shows. Cirque du Soleil on Broadway, The Seven Fingers, Ringling Brothers, Circus Lives, just to name a few. Here is Oliver Karen, who I believe started when they were like 8 years old with her. And they've been on the road with Cirque du Soleil and Seven Fingers. They're world renowned. Here is a present student, a child on silks in her program. This is I King. Sidney Bateman, who began with her also when I believe he was 9 years old, and I met him back then. He has gone on to an incredible career. He is, these days, and does anybody watch the World Wrestling Federation? You may recognize him then as Reginald. Yeah. He was with Cirque du Soleil and Seven Fingers on Broadway for many, many, many years, and he is now an acrobat with the World Wrestling Federation. There are also documentaries about his life. If you go to Jessie's website for Circus Harmony, you will find those. I also want to give a shout out to Jessie's sons, Keaton, who is performing in Australia with Circa, their top dance acrobatic troupe, and Kellen, who her younger son, who's one of the top jugglers in the country, a very innovative performer. Did I miss Eliana? No, here we go. This is Eliana, Jessie's daughter, who is, there isn't any act I think she can't do. She's a wonderful aerialist, but she gained some fame when she was on Ringling Brothers. She was the youngest female cannonball in Ringling's history. Jessie used to lament, she used to say, Jessie would go visit her and Eliana would write me and say, you know, I'm being shot out of a cannon 3 times a day, yet my mother tells me to be careful crossing the street. And there's Reggie again in the wrestling ring. In case you can't tell, we're kind of old now. I, for one, really miss having someone stand on my shoulders in my head. I don't know about anybody else. Yeah. What can I tell you? That once upon a time, that was my happy place. My other happy place is painting. But all of us migrated well into other worlds where we could make use of our learnings. As teachers ourselves, what we have in common is the love of seeing light bulbs go off, making a difference in the lives of our young, enthused students. The work ethic that was passed on by our venerable teachers is like the passing of a baton. The core of most of our students are minorities from underserved neighborhoods, not neighbors, but neighborhoods. This is one of my troupe of students from a program I call The Art of Balance. And this is in Newburgh. Safe Harbors of the Hudson, which is a wonderful housing and arts organization. I'm a firm believer in the kids when we take a break, they love to look at pictures. And I love to show them some of them have never even been to a circus. So to show them what is possible, as Chrissy was so eloquently saying, to give them, a lens into another world, a window view. It's wonderful. And creative, I like to introduce art into my classes too, that the kids learn every side of an angle of creativity that goes into creating a show. I think it's important. So it's the best we can hope for, to offer today's youth opportunities to work as a team, to build esteem for themselves and for others, to have them experience being challenged in a safe, caring environment, to ignite a spark that carries them through life and helps them face future adversities, all of which circus does. In the chance they are listening, thank you, Nina and Gregory.
Thank you, Nina and Gregory.
I would like to say also, since she's here, that I have the intense pleasure of having Claire, Chrissy's daughter, working alongside with me in a program in Newburgh starting in February. And that would be good. And Vince, I didn't give you an opportunity, and I feel bad about that. Is there something you'd like to say to come up and add to?
I'm good.
Because you were fabulous. Well, again, I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is fabulous to have you all here and to have been able to do this. I want to thank again the Hoboken Historical Museum, Bob and Holly, Rand and Bill, McKevin, Lois, everyone who contributed to making this a success. And I'm just very honored to be here.
There is a question from YouTube.
Okay, that's great.
Brigitte von Brunn asked quite a while ago, what kind of safety precautions did you take at the time, just in case you fell down during rehearsal?
So the question is, what kind of safety precautions did we take at the time, so in case we fell down during rehearsal?
Yes.
Next question.
Have you heard of prayer?
Thank you, Brigitte.
Okay, no, seriously, I will say that Nina and Gregory, if you'll note some of the, I don't know if you can go back, but some of the early slides, you'll see Nina holding ropes. That's called a safety. That's a pulley system that goes, and usually the top mounter, the bottom, to heck with them. The top mounter, such as when, well, you had safeties when you were working first for the falling ladder. I know Mia and Donna had safeties. I had safeties. Kathy had safeties when she was on my head going up the ladder. And it was a kind of a sign of graduation when you got the safety taken off. It was a confidence that you've got this. And they would declare that. I mean, you might feel it, you'd wait for them to declare that you're on your own. But safety was very well managed by Nina and Gregory. They were very careful, and they were very experienced in spotting, which is an art in itself. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Yes?
So you talked about the big showdown with the Big Apple Circus people and then Nina and Gregory. So why did everyone go with Nina and Gregory?
Oh, okay. Because they were their whole focus was teaching students learning more. And that was our whole focus. If we became better acrobats and aerialists and performers, then it would serve us later on. But if we stopped working with them, we would be stilted in what we hadn't learned enough. We were all hungry to learn more because we had already experienced how, giving they were and what incredible fodder they were giving us, the skills, the abilities, the confidence, the choreography and acts. We wanted more. And we weren't going to get that by staying with the show whatsoever.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the photograph that you showed of the woman being shot out of the cannon,
Yes, Eliana.
2 questions. How high did she go? And on the lower left of the photo, I saw like this white little little circle. Was that the place she landed?
She landed in a net at the, this is a 3-ring circus ringling. She was shot out of the cannon, running, and landed in, actually it wasn't a net, it was an incredible inflated bag, mat that she landed in with beautiful form too. Flying, it was just beautiful. At the other end, and she did this sometimes 3 times a day. And after every flight, she had to text her mother that she was okay. Yes.
When I look at these pictures, they scare me. I mean, that's sometimes why you go to the circus, because you see things that, you never see before, and it's great. Was anybody seriously hurt that you know of?
Right here.
Yeah. Do you want to answer that, Tom?
I'm okay.
She's here. She's okay now. She's good now. Can I address that, Donna, or no?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Donna and Mia were performing in circus. How many years did you guys tour?
I don't know, but that's where it is.
2 years.
2 years. Okay. And that's where they met you.
Yeah.
There was equipment failure and Donna fell and shattered her arm. And that kind of ended the act. So it is a real, there is that reality. There is that chance. But I'm telling you, it's all of us were well trained. And I think Gregory used to say that most of the time when there's an accident in circus, it's because of equipment failure, not human error. It's
That's part of the learning. That's how you learn. You get up again and you do it again. And in the process, you figure out what you did wrong.
There is a saying in circus,
yes.
there is nothing wrong with falling. It's when you stop.
It's when you
falling.
For those who didn't hear, George said that there's a saying in circus that there's nothing wrong with falling. It's when you stop falling. And just to address what your concerns, yes, and I think that's part of the allure of circus, is that, as Jesse says, you defy gravity. It's risk. There is risk. There is that element of risk and suspense. I mean, why, for goodness sakes, are so many people addicted to these extreme sports and TV shows now, where people who aren't trained are doing crazy things? At least in circus, the training is there, and the agility and the control of body is there, so it becomes a beautiful performance, not something fearful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, once they lost the space on Washington Street, what became of them? Because you you said they lost the space,
Yes.
and then you went into their legacy, but what happened to them?
Chrissy, can you answer that?
Well, they moved the school to the boys' club in Jersey City.
No.
They moved the school to the Boys Club in Jersey City after they lost the space.
Right. And they were there for several years.
Yeah, I don't think Hoboken will ever see another circus school, so it was something. Yes,
So like, some of the pictures had like a white background that seemed like they were photographed in the Washington Street studio. So it's 22-foot ceiling, so does that mean a big backdrop was lowered in the background? It's like way before Photoshop or anything.
Right.
So,
It was just these big sheets on rolls
okay,
that they mounted at the top
Sure.
and they pulled in.
that's a long way to go though.
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the other part is, like when you toured, you were still using these ladder acts in a way, right? I mean, would you bring the ladders with you so they were dependable equipment?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how many of those ladder acts went on to, we worked on them, they built them, Gregory designed them and
Sure.
built them. And we practiced on them and we worked on developed acts, but I don't know how many actually made it to touring. It's interesting enough that when you saw my students on that version of a ladder, my version of a ladder, I designed that apparatus and had it built by a foundry. And it was because at the time I was the director of Circus Arts at Williamsburg Movement and Arts Center in Brooklyn. And they had incredibly low ceilings. I'm embarrassed to say, they were like 10.5 feet. So we had, I mean, trapeze was, we tried to do aerial, they were kids, so I could do, you know. But as my kids aged out after, you know, I was there 8 years, and as my kids aged out, they got to be teens, and they still worked with me. They just, and they were so upset because if they hung from their knees by the trapeze, their heads were on the floor. I couldn't go any higher. So I designed this ladder as a means of giving them some of the ability to work acrobatically and aerially on it. They could swing from the rungs, they could, you know, and they loved it. So in a sense, I didn't realize that I continued the ladder theme with my own kids.
Well,
Yes.
Gregory made most of the equipment right there at the Circus Arts Center. He had his own shop. So like my ramp
Yes.
with the ball and the ladder, it all broke down into pieces. And we at each show, we had to screw it all together for each show.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think that was heard by the audience? Should I repeat that?
It would be good to repeat it, yeah.
Chrissy was just saying that the ramp that you saw that her ball went up with a ladder, Gregory made that in the studio, and when they were going on the road, it all broke down into pieces, and every show, every place they went, they had to reassemble it, totally reassemble it for performing on, which is, wow.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a sort of general question about this sort of, and I have, some of the things you mentioned kind of answered the question, but I was just wondering if you could talk about the types of places where you would train, like just more broadly throughout your circus career. Like, Chrissy, you were the one who found the space on Washington Street.
Right.
Yeah, so you just like, were you just always on the hunt for somewhere with tall windows, so you knew there was a tall space behind there? Like,
Yeah, well, Nina and Gregory
you know?
had put it out to all the students that they needed a new place.
Yeah.
And since I was practicing in their apartment, I saw him quite often, and he said, Chrissy, you will do. You will find us place.
So you also trained in your loft. You had your own New York City.
Yeah, and I had a
spaces.
loft where I
Yeah.
practiced too, but it was nothing compared to, they wanted a school, and we made it happen.
And if you could speak to some other places around the area in New York or in Jersey or wherever, where circus was able to happen, like, You know, like was it all like, so was the Washington?
Back then, there was very few places, there were no places. Back then, this was the only circus school that existed. You know, not just in New Jersey, but in the country.
Well, Big Apple Circus did create a school, right, George, you taught there.
Yes,
Where was that?
That was Spanish Harlem, 103rd and 5th Avenue.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How high were the ceilings?
Oh, very- no. There was just a little studio, about 12 feet
Yeah.
high. But then they had the gym, which was very high, huge gymnasium, enormous.
when, in the beginning, when I met Nina and Gregory, they were teaching in the Bronx, in an abandoned building with no windows. I mean, it was really just a freezing cold slum. And they had, their students were kids who had been in alleyways, dragging mattresses into alleyways and jumping out of second floor windows, trying to teach themselves how to, I mean, that's the energy and the drive that they wanted to work with. You know, kids really wanted. So, you know, I will say this, in the beginning, Jesse and I would go up there and at their, invitation to work with these kids they were teaching, and Bruce Lipton was a gymnast who was also teaching these kids, and he took a troupe of those kids that he discovered and was working with. He brought them down to Nina and Gregory the first year of the Big Apple Circus and presented them, said, I can't do more because I have limited, and I felt like you could work with these kids. And Nina and Gregory looked at them and said, okay. So this was a troupe of boys who were maybe from, I'd say about 7 or 8, going up to 16. And they were fabulous. They had no form, they had no line, no one taught them to that point. But boy, did they have guts, and boy, were they strong and agile. And Nina and Gregory used to refer to them during the first year of the Big Apple Circus. She would say, okay, everybody, my black acrobats and my white cripples. But they went on, this troupe, they called themselves the Back Street Flyers. And they went on, let me tell you, they were in the Big Apple Circus for, I don't know, a decade. And then they went on to win, I think, a silver at the Monte Carlo Circus Festival, most prestigious in the world. It was really something. Yes?
We've got a few more comments from our online friends.
Sure.
All on YouTube. Dan Snow says, thank you. The only better Sunday afternoon entertainment would be circus.
Dan Snow, I will say, is one of my heroes. He is the most amazing stonemason and sculptor you can imagine out of Vermont.
Excellent. Brigitte says, thank you. She asked the question earlier.
Yes, thank you.
And
Good question.
Nimonas, who also gave a round of applause, now asks, you mentioned that he said that American circus was very different from Russian. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the differences?
Ooh.
Chrissy, you want to answer that? Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Russian and Chinese circus, I think, are the best in the world. And it's you understand where Gregory and Nina came from in terms of the discipline, because they are the most disciplined, both of them. As I said, they start kids very young, and they work them relentlessly. And it's treated differently, I think, mentally and spiritually. It's just treated circus as a real art form, as much as ballet is, or opera is, or it's an exact science art. You learn the methodology, and you learn it right, and you do it religiously. You practice, 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 and they have incredibly creative minds over there for acts. I don't think that America has that yet. They're working on it. They're working on it. There are a good many circus schools now. Oh my gosh, I think there's hundreds of them now that exist, organizations and schools that teach circus now, as opposed to when we were learning. And still the ENC, the Cirque du Soleil school in Montreal, is still one of the finest that people aspire to go to. But it's just, I think, a way of over there. In Europe in general, and especially in Russia and China, circus is really revered. And over here, I don't think it still is a stigma about circus that is not respectful, as respectful, I should say.
Some more has come in. Circus Harmony on YouTube says, thank you for sharing this important part of American circus history. And Don Jordan and Nutshell Playhouse on YouTube says, wonderful presentation. So nice to see so many old friends, especially Littleface.
Don Jordan and Peter Canine and I were juggling acrobatic clowns long before Big Apple Circus. We used to street perform in Washington Square Park, which is where I got seen and invited to be the producing clown of Great Adventure Amusement Park, which was just starting back then. So that's a voice from the past. That's wonderful.
So Sonia has said, how wonderful to be reminded of the time we spent with these two wonderful people. And Circus Harmony is asking, when is the book coming out?
Yes.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah, sure.
In your opinion, your
Yeah.
expert opinion, what's the best act that you ever saw where you said, wow, that's the best act, circus act I've ever seen?
Ooh, wow, that's a pretty loaded question. What is the best circus act I personally have ever seen?
Yes.
Okay, it depends on category. I can give you an answer for different categories. I mean, I think for me, the best aerial act I've ever seen live was a Russian act called The Cranes.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
They're upstairs, aren't they?
Excuse me?
Is the crane,
The Cranes.
are they upstairs in the show?
No,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
the best wire act I've ever seen was called Feller Boys and Dodo, and there is a painting of that.
Forgive me.
And by the way, I hope to invite you all up to my art exhibit upstairs, paintings of the circus and of Nina and Gregory. And yes, that was what helped make the life so rich for me. I was certainly when I was performing by day and painting at night. That was to me a dream. I miss it. Yes, it's hard to see, sorry.
Could you imagine any different trajectory of your life had you not found this physical art?
A different trajectory, did you say?
Yeah.
Not coming out of a cannon. Never do that, never do that. You know, Nina had a nickname for me. I was afraid of heights. They made me go up that ladder with that girl. I don't want to do it. They made me. You did what they told you. She called me chicken. But she also called me oak tree. Because she said I was solid base. I can't, I really can't. And you know what? If it was offered me, I would do it all over again. To me, it was a dream life.
Mia Wolf is adding that the flying cranes were on YouTube.
Anyone else?
Photo time?
You gotta catch a train too.
I have no idea what time it is.
About 6 o'clock.
Oh,
No, just kidding.
No.
It's sarcasm.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you all out
Good. So we're gonna turn the lights on in a minute. If you haven't been upstairs to check out these amazing paintings after this amazing lecture, please do. And I'm gonna say that we just heard one of the best lectures you'll ever hear on this subject. Wouldn't you agree? Sure. It may be one of the best lectures we've heard in the museum. But I can definitely say it's the best one of 2022. Anyway, thanks for coming. And we do want to really thank Karen for doing an amazing job. And we met so many amazing people here today. What a community. This is a history that could very easily be forgotten. And but you've been a great spokesman for it, and we have archived it. And want to thank all the museum people who made it possible. Thanks for being here.